And welcome back to The Responsible Edge, the podcast where we explore the bold ideas, uncomfortable truths, and unexpected solutions shaping the future of responsible business. Today on the show, we're unpacking the article, How a Focus on Societal Health Can Help Drive National Growth, a case study created and sponsored by Hyundai about Hyundai's community investments in Georgia, USA. And our guest to unpack all of this today, I'm absolutely thrilled to say, is Andy Last, a corporate affairs strategist and systems thinker with a global track record spanning infrastructure, sustainability, and socio-economic impact. Andy, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on today's show. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Charlie. I am looking forward to this.
Excellent stuff. Now, Andy, I have given a sort of a very, very brief introduction to you, but slightly cryptic introduction to you and what you're working on at the moment. For those of our listeners and viewers who aren't aware of you and your work, would you mind just giving us a flavor as to, what you're currently working on and the sort of most recent part of your career?
Sure. That was a lovely introduction. I hadn't heard that before. So that set the bar quite high. So as of this time last year, I started again as a consultant in my own right. I've called it very humbly lasting impact. So I'm working with organizations to help them link societal and environmental progress to their commercial drivers in order to deliver lasting impact all round. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. I'm working with couple of big corporates and some other consultancies actually helping with their positioning. So I'm enjoying it very much.
Excellent. And before we go back to the origin story, you're also or have certainly written a book or written multiple books. Can you just touch on your authoring as well?
Yeah, I like to say I've written multiple books. I wrote one book, the Business on a Mission, How to Build a Sustainable Brand, which was published 2016. And then publishers wanted to do a second edition. So I wrote a second edition of it in 2022. That came out. So that is all about how you can drive growth by addressing social and environmental issues within the organization. So do that. I do a bit of teaching, some MBA teaching, some postgrad teaching. I'm a member of a think tank, and I'm also sit on the advisory board now for Social Enterprise UK's international arm, which is called Telos. So a few other bits and pieces.
I love it. We dig a little deeper and many hats. Andy's many hats. Right.
So I did a law degree, and one of the things I picked up from that was you never answer the question. You only answer specific questions.
Very good, very good. I love the fact that we've got a guest on who is thinking in those terms. I mean, just to be clear, we are in a safe place, Andy. We are in a safe place. But I think, our listeners and viewers, again, we're going to link to your LinkedIn profile so everybody can kind of dive into the depths and the detail, if you like, and sort of read the timeline of events themselves. But fascinated to understand how we got here. And you've already kind of titillated to the fact that you've entered this new kind of back into consultancy and startup consultancy again. But just take us back to the very beginning, if possible, into those sort of formative younger experiences in your life that have ultimately driven you to be a legal student at a certain point and ultimately do what you've done in your career.
And stop being a lawyer. Yeah.
Stop being a lawyer.
That's a really good question, thinking right back to the beginning. I think we are, most of us, or a lot of us, are formed by our parents and what their values and what they did, and we think about the world of work. And my mum worked in the health service and the care system for all her life. She was caring for her younger siblings from the age of 7.
Wow.
She's now 79, having nursed my dad through his sort of last years of dementia. So she's been a carer for 70 years and continues to volunteer with her hospice. So she's an amazing example, a role model of of an outward look of care and a sort of, I think that gives you an obligation on that there has to be something beyond your individual gain or profit. I think that, I mean, I certainly wasn't equipped in any shape or form to become a carer, but I think that lands something with you. My dad worked in companies all his career. We grew up near Liverpool because he was working there with Littlewoods, which was a very big company at the time. But he always worked in that sort of while we were aware of what he was doing, he was working in the external facing elements of those businesses, so that the business's relationship with NGOs, with politics, with communities, and that side of things. So I think that there's a sort of even more linear link from his career.
Mm-hmm.
That notion that that a company has responsibilities and opportunities beyond its own four walls and its own customer base, that there is a case for engaging in society more fully. So that I grew up with that.
And isn't that amazing though that those two experiences from your mother and your father both align with that sense of acknowledging the service that's at play, both from an individual perspective, but also from an organizational or from a corporate perspective, that there's a requirement, a responsibility to think about something bigger and broader than yourself from both of those perspectives. So out of interest, that then led you to, like, how did you find yourself doing a law degree and looking to go into law?
That's a question that I asked myself for a long time, but I don't know. I think there's, I think on reflection, I think I grew up with a sense that there is, as you say, there's some sort of bigger rules, and I don't have a faith, but I certainly think there's something bigger out there. And I remember one of my tutors at university, I was sort of handing in law essays, and he asked, was I practicing Catholic? And I said, no, but interested you got that from that essay. And there was sort of areas of ethics within that and of natural law, and are there certain things that are bigger than us that we find interest in, as well as obligation and service. I wouldn't hold myself up as some sort of great servant of other people, but I find it interesting, and that there is something, there are sort of bigger obligations as humans come together in societies and communities, that there are naturally some structures around those. And I think law is one, a man-made structure around those, but there are laws that exist in different societies and different times. So I think it was that I was searching for. I'm very glad I didn't become it. I don't think I'd have been a very good lawyer at all. And
why do you say that? Why wouldn't you have made a good lawyer?
I think I'd have got a bit bored with it. Actually, I love being an entrepreneur. I loved having clients and different things. And then, both of those could easily apply to a law firm. I spent a year between school and university working in a law firm in Liverpool, and being the sort of young person they'd send to sit behind the barristers in court. And some of watching these barristers, some of them were spectacular, and it was incredible. And I thought, I could never be like that. I'm not a performer in that way. And others were excruciating, like when you're watching a stand-up die on stage. It was just, so it was highly entertaining, but it slightly put the fear of God into me. And then towards the end of my law degree, and I had a place lined up at law school and a contract, and I just thought, just before I did my finals, I thought, I'm not convinced this is for me. So I deferred it all for a year, gave myself a year, and I thought I'd just get a job in London. And I got a job in a comms consultancy in London. I went for the interview just before my finals, and the interview went quite well. And the guy who ran the consultancy said, do you need to get back up to uni, or can you stay for lunch? Because there's a young lad works here. I think you'll get on with him. And it was Richard, who then later on, so I ended up working there, became friends with Richard, and later on we set up our business together in 2000. So it was, I think it was all meant to be.
And just to pry into that decision to defer and then head to London and get a job, what was the attraction?
I'd done a holiday job in a PR firm in Liverpool, and it just, that all seems quite, I don't, and with hindsight, I'm not sure there's a huge amount of difference between some of the communications consultancy and legal advice. They're often the people in the chief exec's ear in a organization, and the role of reputation, and that can clash sometimes with the legal advice they're getting. So I think there's certain similarities.
And so, but coming also back to your point about what you think you would have perhaps found boring, in essence, if you had gone down the legal routes, was there a sense moving into PR and then comms and sort of building your career in that area that there was a bit more creativity, a bit more excitement, a bit more interest in the work itself? Would that be a fair observation?
I think so. And freedom from those legal constraints, I should think. Yeah. This is all with hindsight. I might have had a blissful time as a lawyer. I've got plenty of lawyers, though, who who became, went into the city as lawyers, became incredibly rich. I don't see them overly happy.
Interesting. Well, that's very much a theme for the back end of my getting to know you questions, because I want to come on to that. But an interesting observation. So you mentioned Richard, and you literally meet him on, well, it's not even day one, is it? It's successful interview day, as opposed to the first day when you're working with the consultancy. How long are you guys working together at that agency before you start Salt?
So this was 1990. I started there. We worked together there for a couple of years. Mars was the big client, and that was a great organization to work with. Rich left there in 92. I left shortly afterwards. We both worked in different places, and then flirted around the idea of setting our own thing up. And then that flirting came to a head end of 99, and we opened up Salt as our own business consultancy in January the 1st, 2000. So,
or as it, I mean, what a brilliant day to kick things off. And had you always, thinking back to growing up, and you mentioned the influence of your mum and your dad, and obviously your dad was working in big corporate world. It wasn't necessarily an entrepreneurial sort of startup environment. Was it something that you always knew that you wanted to do, to start your own thing, or was it something that grew and developed over time and meeting the right people like Richard and deciding to do it yourself?
No, it meant it certainly wasn't a plan, and it evolved over time. As you say, meet the right person, working in an industry where there wasn't a massive barrier to entry to set up your own operation. Funnily enough, we were reflecting on this. My dad died last year, and my brothers and I were reflecting on this. All three of us do our own thing. And he did say to us, you should do your own thing. So despite him having worked in big corporates and my mum working for the biggest organization of them all, the NHS, there was they had talked to that. Dad had certainly talked to that thought.
And do you recall what your dad said in terms of why he thought it was such a good idea for you guys to?
His sort of his favorite cousin, who, funnily enough, I live very near now, had set up his own ad agency, and weirdly, living in Teddington now, that office is a couple hundred yards from where I live.
Oh, and wow!
It was always exciting going to see them, and I think Dad it was probably drunk one night with them. He probably said it. So he also told me to be a lawyer as well. So you pick and choose what advice you take. Yeah.
Well, you ultimately picked up on it all, didn't you? You just happened to be at different stages along the way. I want to ask you about the experience of, starting Salt, and what was it like for you personally? Developing and building your own thing. What was, if you had to sort of describe to somebody who was thinking about doing something similar? Like what was that experience like for you?
Blissful. Honestly, it was spectacular. I so set it up. Rich and I set it up. So I was working with my best mate, and we have very different skill sets, but trusted each other implicitly. So I think that was helpful and lucky. We hired Nikki in year one, or just after in 2001, who eventually became our MD and our group MD, and she was there for 20 years, and she brought a different skill set again. We had a brilliant, we've had an amazing commercial officer at the right time. But it was fabulous. I've probably got rose tinted glasses looking back on it now, but it was amazing to have the freedom to work with interesting clients where we could really just give our best advice. We weren't second guessing what the corporate line of our agency might be or what the demands of that might be. We were able to hire the sort of talent and promote junior people who were great and just fitted, and there was no sort of structure. And we could make it up as we were going along, and it was the wildest ride. Honestly, it was spectacular.
I love it. That freedom that you've described in decision making, in agility, and being able to adapt and evolve.
I think we were a bit lucky in the economic cycle as well. We started 2000. We did a bit of work with Unilever early on, which was great. We won Manpower as a client in our first year, and again, the guy who ran Manpower in the UK was taking a punt on the two of us. We really didn't have anything else, but we ended up working with them for 20 years. But we also were there at the dot-com bubble. So very early on, sort of 2000, 2001, all this there was a bubble building up around dot-coms, and all this money was tipping into these organizations, and a few of them hired us to work for them, and I couldn't for the life of me work out what their business model was or how this thing was going to make money. But they were paying us fees. I remained confused. I thought, well, I've only just set up a business. I don't really understand business. They must understand it at a deeper, more profound level than I do. Yeah, that was a bubble. But no, we were lucky in that sense with our timing as well.
At what point did sort of because I'm presuming at this stage, you obviously you can be selective around who you're working with, etc. But how much of the kind of, and again, I'm going to use horrible terminology here that's very contentious, but how much was the sort of sustainability or ESG based considerations part of your thinking at this point in time? And how did it evolve over the timeline of Assault?
So not at all at the beginning. It was about being a strategic comms consultancy. We both believe passionately of the importance of communications for any organization, and used strategically and thoughtfully could be an incredibly powerful tool and should be advising at the top table. So that was where we were at. And then I definitely had we got into sort of year four, around about 2004, and we were doing well, and we had clients, and we built up a team and nice office, and that was all good. But there was something niggling with me, and there was something missing. And I can remember that, and I didn't know what was missing. And then I was asked by Unilever it was 1 October. It was coming up to half term, so it wasn't massively popular at home. But they said, "Is there any chance you can go to Kibera next week, which is the huge informal dwelling outside Nairobi, in Kenya? And can you go there? Because we've got this hand washing program, which we think is a nice story, and it sort of links possibly a bit to the article we're going to talk about as well." But they said, "Could you go out there and just check the story's okay? There aren't any issues with it, and go and have a look at it." So I said, "That's great." And funnily enough, the other influence with hindsight growing up, I grew up on the Wirral where Port Sunlight is, which was the model village William Lever had built, and had created a soap called Lifebuoy, which was affordable for the masses in and around Liverpool and then wider, and particularly in the mass urbanisation that was happening in Liverpool, people living in slum dwellings alongside the Mersey and being subject to waterborne diseases like cholera. And he created a soap that they could afford called Lifebuoy, which would help protect their lives. And he would sell more soap. And he was very clear-eyed about that. He wasn't pretending he was doing it out of the goodness of his heart. There was a social element to it, but he was a businessman and built a hugely successful business of that. Anyway, they said, could you go out there? There's a soap brand we have there called Lifebuoy, which you won't have heard of. I said, well, funnily enough, I grew up hearing that story. So I went out there. I met an amazing woman who had just joined Unilever, who had a PhD in hand washing, and a PhD she was from Mali, and had her PhD from the London School of Hygiene, on the basis that hand washing with soap is the single most cost-effective health intervention in the world. Was then, is today, but not sex, vaccines, and science, or that sort of science. And she had worked in the UN to try and push this, the unloved, boring idea of hand washing as a health intervention. Got a bit frustrated, went to work for an NGO, got even more frustrated, and then came to the conclusion that if she wanted to push hand washing with soap at scale, the best place to do that would be in a company that owned a soap, because they would have a vested interest in making it happen. And all my niggling things disappeared then. I thought, that is what I need to do with my career. I help make the case and stop this sort of pussyfooting around saying companies get involved in things for CSR or philanthropy, or we're doing it to make the world a better place. All those things are true, but you have to tie it to the commercial motive, and then it lasts. And I met some amazing people in Kibera, people from the London School, people from Unilever, people from USAID who were out there at the time, in the World Bank, and came back, and good people at Unilever said, is this a good story? Is the story okay? And I said, yeah, the story is great, but the story is how you're going to build your business in Africa and save lives. It's not we're this wonderful corporate citizen doing a beautiful thing. It's the two have to go hand in hand. And that was when I realized that's the role of communications, is you have to make the commercial case and communicate that message clearly. Because if companies, Unilever or others, are out there saying we're doing this out of the goodness of our hearts, then it doesn't survive cuts, doesn't survive sort of budget constraints. It doesn't even help in the negotiations with, we're negotiating partnerships with UNICEF. UNICEF don't believe Unilever or anyone else are doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, and it just undermines all that. If you're not honest, if you say, we are committed to this hand washing with soap program, we will commit for the long term because we believe it will drive soap consumption, and we believe our understanding of how you drive behavior change through marketing and how you get distribution, how you make soap affordable, all those things will help you, UNICEF, Save the Children, whatever, in your drive to alleviate child mortality. And that was when everything changed for me. Okay, that is what we do.
And that is pure, that is authenticity at its very heart. Is a term that's thrown around, but ultimately it's acknowledging the commercial consideration which is leading to this course of action, which I think you've described so perfectly, Andy. Out of interest, this is 2004?
So 2004, we started doing some toothbrush work, which was some toothpaste work, which was the sort of origin story for me. That we'd already started doing that. And that was, again, it was Unilever. They have toothpaste brands around the world. They had a partnership with the World Dental Federation. And in every market, the toothpaste brand manager had a partnership with the local dental association. And all those partnerships were doing different things. So in one country, they were working on a campaign to stop dentists smoking, because smoking's just about the worst thing you can do for your oral health. And you see a dentist smoking, that's not the best message. So, and the Unilever local company was supporting this. And there was no vested interest in that. It's a good thing for oral health to stop dentists smoking. That doesn't tie into the Unilever toothpaste business. So I was lucky enough to go and run sort of workshops in all the different regions to see, is there a common thread that we can all agree on? And we got to twice daily brushing. So lots of countries and lots of people only brush once a day. If you get people brushing twice a day, that has a significant impact on oral health. Getting people to brush, move from brushing once a day to twice a day also has a significant impact on toothpaste sales. And that's how the two things knit together. So I had that thought bubbling, and then it was 2006. I went to Kibera.
It's fascinating. This is, I mean, I know you're a self-deprecating chap, so I'm the one that's going to propose this, but this is fairly pioneering thinking in the essence of we are right in the midst of the CSR bolt-on, initiative sort of world, aren't we? And to have this kind of joined up thinking around, well, no, we can both have a positive societal or environmental impact aligned with corporate outcomes or commercial outcomes. That is a different way of thinking. Did that land? Is that how it landed with your clients at this time?
It's well, funnily enough, the chief exec at Unilever at the time was a guy called Patrick Cheskow, and when he saw, we put a piece in the FT, and the FT journalist, he did a great piece, a lot of research, he did a full page in the FT, and it was headlined "Unilever looks to clean up in Africa." So it was quite a punchy headline, but he wrote, Barney Jopson wrote to the point that this is sustainable because there is a commercial, and it was in the FT, obviously, so it's a sort of a title that was understanding of commercial motives. And when it came out, Patrick Cheskow sent an email to Miriam Sidibe, who was the hand washing lady, saying, "This is the first time I've seen anyone in the company understand when I say do well by doing good. This is it." So it was punch. People were nervous about saying, we're a corporate doing this to make money, because it can sound callous, and it thinks, I don't want to sit in a room with UNICEF saying I'm driven by money and you're driven by saving children's lives. And there's sort of human aspects to it. But I would argue that it's not just you can do good and make money. You can do more good if you tie it to the commercial drivers of the business. That's yeah.
Andy, you're going to get your first hear of the show. Cannot argue with that. That was absolutely brilliantly presented.
But it is difficult to land, and I think there are a lot of cultural nuances too. So I think in sort of Northern Europe, if you look at the sort of Benelux and the Scandinavian countries and Germany to a degree, and certainly the UK, there is a history of business engaging in society. Carlsberg did it. You go to the origin story of Carlsberg in Denmark, there's essentially creating a social security network. Obviously, I grew up by William Lever's village of Port Sunlight, but Cadbury's did it at Bourneville. There's hundreds of those villages around the UK. So there is this sense, I think, from certain parts of the world that there can be a natural connection there. You go to the States, and it's a very different cultural background. The States, the sort of origin story of the founding fathers and then going over on the map, these were people who were highly entrepreneurial because they were going to the other side of the world to create a new life for themselves, but also deeply religious. They were escaping, they wanted a different kind of religious orthodoxy that they were escaping from in Europe. So they're really deeply religious people who had to square this highly entrepreneurial, want to make a load of money with, I want to honor my God and be a good, whatever religion I was practicing. And they squared it in the States by saying, okay, I'm going to work really hard 6 days a week, make loads of money, be a success. And on the seventh day, I'm going to go to church, I'm going to visibly go to church and give a big donation each week. And I think that culture in the States, you need to understand that culture before you're trying to start land these sort of things in the States, because the culture in the States, therefore, is to make an enormous amount of money and afterwards be expected to be philanthropic and to do what Warren Buffett did, what Gates did, or what Zuckerberg has done. You give your money away afterwards. And that's a different cultural starting point. And I think in the era of globalization, these things are merging, and it's different in South Asia and it's different in Latin America. So you need to understand where these sort of things sit and where they evolve from.
It's interesting you said, Andy. I mean, again, totally hearing what you're saying there in terms of the cultural differences. I suppose it comes back to your previous point, which is that if you can create, and this is where the comms element becomes so paramount to getting this stuff implemented, if you can present the case from a commercial outcome perspective, really in a very compelling way, then regardless of whether or not you have that US mentality of what can realize the biggest return or not, why I'm doing this doesn't almost matter.
Yeah.
It's the outcome that's realized as a result of the compelling proposition.
Exactly. So. I think that's a relevant thing for all the debates going on today.
Indeed. Now, Andy, we have, again, we should just do a whole separate show on Andy Last's sort of, let's go through all the different chapters of SALT, etc. But I mean, and for now, if possible, move us forward. Would you mind providing a bit of an introduction, an overview of the article that I mentioned at the beginning, and perhaps just then picking out from that article whatever you found to be the most interesting points made?
Indeed. So the article was titled "How a Focus on Societal Health Can Help Drive National Growth," and it was a piece supported by Hyundai and looked at their community investments in Georgia, in the southern US. And it was, I think it goes a bit to that theme, certainly that American theme, that what you do, because the title, from that title, you would think, okay, well, maybe that is tying the two things together, societal and commercial. But they steered away at the last minute, no pun intended, from being explicit about that. And it talks about what they're doing. And there were certainly things around encouraging STEM teaching in schools and building up a talent base. And it talked about child safety, which again, if you're a car manufacturer, you can see the connection to car safety. And it also talked for their Cure for Cancer, a Hope on Wheels program they had to cure cancer. But it was never got to the point where it was, the Unilever looks to clean up in Africa. It never made that connection. They were nervous about making that connection. Now, for me, the connection will always between doing good in society and environment and the business drivers will normally sit in one of four areas. It'll either be that the societal program, like the ones Hyundai's talking about, either it is about engaging and making a more productive workforce, engaging talent, or it's about preserving your license to operate, or it's about driving the marketing agenda, or it's about driving sales agenda. And in the things they're doing, there is a connection there. Investing in STEM, you can understand how that will help preserve and attract a better workforce and create a more talented workforce and create what they need to do that. And interestingly, this reminds me, I did a piece of work for Rolls-Royce years ago. Again, Rolls-Royce was doing all sorts of different community programs. But they thought they needed to rationalize. And actually, we probably need to get to sort of a big thing we do. And what might that be? And so we went through this process with them. And STEM became the sort of recommendation of this needs to be the real focus area. A, because it was helping them develop the engineering talent and attract engineering talent rather than it being sucked off towards Silicon Valley or whatever. And secondly, there were STEM programs that head office was doing that was really good and engaging with government and school programs. And there were STEM programs that engineers in Crewe and Derby were going in and teaching, encouraging girls to go into STEM in schools. And at the time, there was quite a lot of tension between head office and the sort of on the ground operations. So there was a way of knitting that together. So there was a clear business case doing that. And I suspect there probably is with Hyundai investing in STEM. They were squeamish about talking that. The child safety thing, again, you can sense how focusing on child safety provides there is a societal benefit to that, and there would be a way of using that to underpin safety messages or technical messages about the quality of Hyundai cars, and bring that into your messaging in some way. But again, they're sort of squeamish about making that connection, which I think undermines it, and which I think makes these sort of programs vulnerable to budget threats. And then the cancer bit. I mean, you obviously can't say anything that's sort of driving money towards looking at cure for cancer is a good thing. I don't think it's a sustainable thing in Hyundai, and that it misses that connection. So these things risk being simply nice CSR community investments, which don't make the case that the title promises to make.
Andy, that was brilliantly represented. And I should say, for any of our listeners and viewers that want to check out the source article and sort of dive into things a bit deeper, we'll obviously link to it in our various materials. I actually did a little bit of digging, just to understand kind of whether or not Hyundai had any particular ESG related issues over the course of the last few years. And one of the things that struck me was in 2022, there was and I'm not going to provide the full detail because I didn't read into it enough, but there was certainly an issue and concern around the management of the labor force in the US, and in particular, I think there was a child labor related issue. Now, I found that to be particularly stark, and actually coming back to your point about the alignment of the initiatives that are detailed in this article with the commercial outcomes that Hyundai was looking to achieve. For me, seen in the context of what happened in 2022 and some of the issues that they were having, you can see why there perhaps was that, slight resistance to tying this directly to the commercial outcomes, because I think that you can see that they've done this in response to perhaps some of those issues they previously had. So just touch on that, like, if the goal and objective of investing in these sorts of initiatives is actually to say, do you know what, we've had some problems in these areas, we need to do something to sort of improve that public perception of the way that we operate relating to our management of our staff or our people. Is that a good enough reason to do it, or are we still missing the point of not tying it to our commercial?
No, I think that would absolutely tie in your license to operate and your ability to keep going as a business in that location and with that consumer base. But I would then look at, okay, how do you use that to have an authentic conversation with key stakeholders in that space, the sort of campaigning organizations and governments about child labor, and make sure you are having an open conversation with them and they can see that you're doing the right thing in that space. But also then to take it through, if that issue has bled into the consumer car buying public's consciousness, to make sure that comes through in the branding in some way, that there is a rigorous process in place to prevent that in the supply chain. I don't think necessarily sponsoring some STEM work in Georgia is the totality of addressing child labour. You need to have the sort of robust systems in place.
Here. Let me ask you this. You've touched on this, but this is very much more like a personal. Well, I don't think it's particularly unique, but it's a question I'd love to ask you on the basis of your experience. Is there a danger that when you're a brand looking at potentially all of these nice to have initiatives, as you've alluded to, that make us feel like we're doing, corporate care, corporate good, if you like, that you actually miss by sort of diluting, if you like, the alignment with the commercial outcome. Perhaps if you were to pick one or just a few areas to focus on, that actually by choosing to engage with too many initiatives, you ultimately end up diluting in the mind of the stakeholder that association with what's actually core and fundamental to your organization. Is that the problem of not following the alignment of our corporate activity with the commercial outcomes that we're looking to try and achieve?
It's one of them, yes, that it would confuse the audience. The particular stakeholder audience you're thinking about. We did I loved work. We did a lot of work with Kimberly-Clark for many years. So the world's biggest paper company, who are one of the world's biggest paper companies, whose brand, one of their brands in UK is Andrex, and exists in different names in different parts of the world. It's the biggest non-food brand in the UK. So a great brand, deeply loved brand, and everybody can sort of think to the puppy and what that is saying about a toilet paper that's soft and comfortable and very long and robust and whatever, and all the analogies you have to use if you're talking about toilet tissue, because you can't really talk about product use. But a sort of a much loved brand built with some very clear messaging and positioning over 30, 40 years around the core thought of elevating the standard of clean. So that's what the Andrex brand is, was and is all about. Now, they came under pressure, similar maybe to the Hyundai story you're talking. They were under huge pressure from Greenpeace for many years around deforestation. So big paper company, Greenpeace, deforestation, a very clearly an obvious point of conflict. And Greenpeace were campaigning for years and pushing, and they weren't talking to each other, both fearful and suspicious of each other. And, Greenpeace thinking these are evil Bond villains sitting in Texas plotting how to destroy the planet. And the Kimberly-Clark people thinking these are eco-terrorists who don't understand a thing and we're good people. And eventually, Kimberly-Clark did move to, an entirely sustainably sourced paper supply chain, all FSC accredited sourcing of paper. And great, everyone happy. And Greenpeace came to them and said, look, we're great, glad your system is now great. It needs to be an example to others. You've got much bigger reach than we have. You're in people's bathrooms and kitchens and home. You've got these huge advertising budgets. Can you talk about this? And they said, oh, great, yeah. So they produced Eco Andrex with nice pictures of bamboo on the front. And it bombed. And it bombed because it was so disconnected from what you've been saying about Andrex for 40 years. And so that's when they approached us and said, look, how can we make consumers understand this is good? And I said, I don't think you can. I think you need a sustainable supply chain for, your license to operate apart from anything else and your reputation. And, by the way, it's the right thing to do, but great. And to ensure you've got a resilient supply chain and a sustainable source of paper for the long term. But that needs to be, you have an FSC logo on pack, and there's details for the people who really want to know about it, and for the stakeholders you have to persuade, all the detail there. That isn't a consumer proposition, or if it is a consumer proposition, it's very different from what you've been saying for 40 years. You were about elevating the standard of clean. What you could do is address your real issue, which is the fact that toilet paper is hidden away at the back of the supermarket, that 90% of it's sold on discount. You could do something, a social initiative. There are 2 billion people in the world who don't have access to a toilet. You could organize a partnership with someone like UNICEF to support those things where you're elevating the standard of clean for people in those parts of the world. And if we talk to Sainsbury's, they might be interested in putting that front of store, not a discount, which they were. So we did that, and this sort of got the partnership working with UNICEF and the funding stream and all those sort of things. Sainsbury's put a little pilot, put the Andrex rolls with UNICEF and all this sort of stuff front of store, no discount, and they sold 1 million extra rolls in the pilot period. And then great. And then this thing has been expanded over 14 markets now. It's been going, I think, 12 years. It's the single most cost-effective return on investment for marketing investment, driving sales each year. But the social initiative is completely in line with the brand positioning. So to your point about confusing the audience is, well, I know what Andrex is doing. That's what Andrex believes in. They elevate the standard. They don't use these words, but it's elevating the standard of clean for me. And it's elevating the standard of clean for those people in sub-Saharan Africa or wherever it was.
And crucially, it's a narrative that then becomes embedded, and it's a long-term commitment. And that's where the authenticity of the association plays out. It's not just alignment with the brand itself. It's the fact that we commit to it. I've always had
you can afford to commit to it because he's also addressing the fundamental business issue of how you make toilet roll a bit more prominent and a bit less discounty in store.
Which is only ever going to be something that you want to preserve and you want to maintain, and therefore having the justification for it.
But it's important that the FS is not saying that the deforestation isn't even a bigger issue for them. They have to address that, but that's a shield and it's an important thing. But the social bit can align with the marketing push.
Indeed, and perhaps there might be space in the toilet tissue market for another brand that had founded itself upon that message of
without question. So this initial conversation, and this started in 2014 when Who Gives a Crap and all these challenger brands weren't there. I think the market has definitely moved. There is definitely moved.
But crucially, it's about knowing what you are and what your positioning is, and aligning what you do from a social and environmental perspective. And
exactly, and that's often a problem in this area, that people forget who they are as the sales director or the marketing director, and they say, "Oh, this is the do good bit, so I'm going to be someone completely different in this negotiation."
And I think the thing that strikes me, I want to ask you on this, on a much smaller scale, thinking about the SME market. It's always thing that struck me about this notion of our charity of the year. I've always found that incredibly difficult to circle because you think to yourself, so hold on a minute, you're going to put this energy and this effort into building a partnership for 1 year with a particular charity, and then you're just going to rip up that narrative and story and find another the following year and miss out upon that accumulative compound effect of building a relationship and a story with, a single charity that you want to support. Just, I mean, again, I know it's sort of below your pay grade, but from a SME perspective, is that an area where this thinking should be applied?
Totally. And I think so of course there's nothing wrong with charity. Charity is an amazing thing. I do think charities should be an individual choice. Also, if I'm a shareholder in a business, I kind of would rather, make my own choices about what charities I'm going to support with my dividends. But that's a purely hypothetical thing. But I think, and often in the charity of the year is, we're giving our staff agency to choose this. And the real way to drive engagement with staff is to give them agency over real decisions in the sort of material decisions in the company. But it's not beyond the wit of man to identify what charity could align with that business's drivers, whether they're around talent or around the brand positioning or whatever, and to identify something that you can support for the long term and commit to supporting for the long term because it helps with your core strategy. Andy,
I want to ask you something a little sort of off-piste, if you like, from where we've been so far in this really interesting conversation, from a sort of a corporate perspective and from a positioning perspective as an organization. I want to ask about the broader implications from your perspective on organizations taking on this responsibility to affect, change from a societal or an environmental perspective. Are we sort of getting to a point of sort of normalizing, if you like, the abdication of government responsibility when it comes to affecting change? Or are we looking at creating a sort of a new age when everything sort of works in unison, both government, public sector, private sector, etc.?
I don't know, is the honest answer. I think you have to have, the answer cannot be the state, government abdicating this responsibility to business. It's interesting, actually. I mentioned Carlsberg before. The Carlsberg, the museum in Copenhagen is really interesting, and they talk to, when Carlsberg founded the brewery, there wasn't a social security network. Government wasn't able to do it, wasn't doing things like that. So they did it. They did take on that responsibility, but that did eventually become the responsibility of government. So I think the two have to work in tandem. Certainly on the environmental side, we have to have regulation to force it. Otherwise, things won't change, and the first movers suffer often. and you need to create a level playing field that enables progress. What I was, we did a lot of work in the run up to the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically around making sure hand washing with soap was included in them, which it wasn't in the first draft, because hand washing with soap was taken for granted and not very sexy for all those reasons. But we created a coalition with some of the other soap companies, but also with NGOs and academics, and made the case over a number of years at the General Assembly, and it was included. And it was a great thing. And I remember I was lucky enough to be in New York in 2015 when they were ratified the Sustainable Development Goals. And then it was all very exciting. And then there was a huge concert in Central Park, and Beyonce and Coldplay and all these, and Ed Sheeran and there. And I remember feeling really depressed, thinking, oh God, this was just all to get something signed, and then there's a party, and then everyone goes home. However, what I did experience over the next few years was that, because, to come back to your question, because governments and businesses and academics and not-for-profits had come together and agreed these Sustainable Development Goals, it then became so much easier to negotiate partnerships and to get alignment, because instead of UNICEF and Unilever arguing down to the minutiae about what element someone should have to pay for a bar of soap and all those sort of things, it was saying, no, we're going to agree. We both agree on what's written in SDG 6.2. So that's going to be the focus of our partnership, and we can work together on that, because we, as in government, NGO, corporate, academic, came together to write this thing. So there is an area of mutual interest, mutual need, mutual responsibility. And I think the SDGs created a sort of positive move towards that. I think that it's not been perfect by any shape or form, but I think it does point to some form of model of how these things can and should work together. And also there's a notion that the businesses who are wanting to be progressive, the question of how they can use their voice to try and push for regulation that will raise the bar for others. And in the consumer, whether consumer-facing brands can mobilize their consumers to push for certain regulations in there. But I think we're in a pretty, I don't know, I think I believe companies are the most effective vehicle humans have created to make stuff happen. That can be good or bad stuff. Companies are amoral. And if we rely on companies to be kind of the ethical guard of what we want in our societies, it's tricky. But I think government has to be central.
But ultimately, in the way you've described that, especially around the SDGs, we just have to create the conditions for government and the commercial world to essentially work or find ways of working in partnership that realize societal outcomes through both regulatory environments and, as we've alluded to before in this conversation, clear commercially led outcomes that can be realized by corporates investing in some of these initiatives.
Beautifully articulated. Precisely.
Sorry, no, I overly worded it, but
exactly that.
Yeah. Fascinating. Last question for you before going on to the magic wand. How optimistic or otherwise are you when it comes to where we are in the world of business, and especially in light of some of these societal and environmental issues that we're facing? You've already mentioned that business is the ultimate actor or agent of change, and likely to be the facilitator of the developments that we need to see. How optimistic are you that we're going to be able to address some of these issues?
Yeah, I don't necessarily mean business is the ultimate. I think business is the ultimate driver of change, positive or negative. I mean, it's just a very effective vehicle for stuff to happen.
Yeah.
And we need to make the case as to why those things should be, societally positive and environmentally cognizant. How optimistic? I don't know. I mean, I think the arc of progress is in the right direction. We're clearly in a very difficult time at the moment. I think in countries right across the world, I'm not sure politicians have an understanding of how the world is changing. So I don't think, and that's not to say I do. I just think there is a lack of anyone being able to say, look, this is what the future looks like, and this is how we need to manage our society to go that way. And if you look at the votes that are coalescing, that led to either the sort of Brexit vote or Trump's election or reform in the UK, what I see from the polling isn't necessarily that people agree with their agree that Brexit is the answer to all Britain's problems, or that Trump is in the States, or that Farage is here. It's just that people recognise something as we need to change. That there is change required, and I might not believe he is the answer, but I know voting for him will get people to pay attention and to start thinking about what radical solutions we do need. And that bleeds into companies trying to work out what the future looks like. And then, the impact of technology and AI, these are massive, massive changes. And to your point, I think we need a system in which people can cooperate and can be their best selves. One of the things that stops me being depressed is I've started, as a cliched middle-aged man, I've started running for the first time. And I'm lucky enough to live right next to Bushy Park, which is the home of the park run. So I've started doing the park run, and I toddle off there on a Saturday morning, and we get about 1,600 people in Bushy Park. And there's all the tourists come because it was the first one and everything. And you have 1,600 people all being lovely to each other, all thanking the marshals, thanking the rule makers. Thank you, rule maker. I'll obey those rules, and everyone's lovely to it. No, that's not to say those people are lovely all the time. It's just in the right system, people can behave in a great way, and I think companies can behave can be an amazing force for good in the right system. And I think part of the issues we're facing now in terms of our world and the sustainability world is things like, when Unilever was doing well, everyone said, oh, this is a proof point that sustainable-led business and purposeful business, that is the answer because they're doing well. Great. And then when Unilever doesn't do well, say, oh, no, that proves that all this sustainable stuff was nonsense. And neither's true. Thinking about sustainability, managing your environmental impacts, thinking about the responsibilities and opportunities around societal impacts are a part of business. It's not the binary thing, but they do need to be integrated into business in order to drive sort of longer term health of business and the societies in which they operate.
I absolutely love the fact that you managed to draw an analogy with parkrun to the required circumstances of our corporations moving forward. I would be totally remiss of me, Andy, not to ask you what your record 5K time is, having become a parkrunner.
I don't really look at the times, Charlie, but it's 25.
Because it's not a race, is it? It's a run.
It's 25:56 at the moment.
Very good, very good. Excellent stuff. Well, look, let's conclude now, Andy, if possible, with the magic wand question. So I'll ask you this. I'm fascinated. You've touched upon a number of possible magic wand applications in the conversation, but let me ask you directly now. If I was to hand you a magic wand, you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant. What would that one thing be?
It would be the connection between investors and companies, and that connection between shareholders and companies, because most of the funds that go into investment are sitting in insurance companies or pension funds or sovereign wealth funds or private offices, and that money is looking for long-term returns. If you're a pension fund, you're looking to make sure these returns are coming through in 10, 20, 30 years' time. So that is, in that sense, patient capital, looking for long-term returns. Most people running companies are trying to build a company that will grow and survive and employ people and do all those things, and they are trying to look in the long term. So those sides, good. In the middle, you have a shared trading environment that is sort of working on maths and disconnected from either the long-term aims of the investors and the kind of people who are trying to run businesses on the ground in the real economy. And you have this complete disconnect in the middle. If I had a magic wand, we need a fluid, you do need a fluid market for shares so that good companies, money tips into good companies who are being innovative, and companies that aren't performing can die, and you have that Darwinian evolution. And that is a good thing. That is why I believe companies are the most effective vehicle. So you have fluidity, but the pace and the disconnect from the real economy that exists in so much of the trading, I would wave my wand and have a way with that.
Have you come across? I think it's a brilliant suggestion. You're going to get another here.
One, but yeah, well, and an impossible one. But maybe that's why it's a magic wand. So.
Well, it's a magic wand, and again, that's the key with this. Now, I'm only picking this up because it's fascinating. We literally had a show yesterday with some guests who referred me to, you might have come across it, Make My Money Matter.
Oh,
you come across them?
I have, but not in any great detail.
And again, I'm probably going to butcher this, so I apologize to Make My Money Matter. If the guys are listening in, we'll obviously link to their website. But my understanding is it's very much focused on that pension pot investment, and it's a way of essentially, the customer base essentially engaging with their pension schemes to make sure that the money is being delivered to responsible, appropriate investments. So it's great to see that there are people that are doing things to try and address this. But as you say, it's
I've seen some of their. So to go back to communications, I have seen some of their communications. It's very entertaining and very clear and good messaging. But there is this disconnect in the middle. That's the issue, I think.
Well, it's perhaps something for the next initiative or book or another show at some point down the line. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today. That was, I know, a whistle-stop tour, but it's been a really interesting conversation. I'm sure our listeners and viewers have got a lot from it. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Charlie. It's been a treat.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Andy Last for joining me on today's show and for talking us through some very interesting views on the way that brands align themselves with their social impact. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by TrueMark, the independent mark of integrity for sustainability reporting. In an era where ESG claims face mounting skepticism, political pushback, and accusations of greenwash, TrueMark helps organizations cut through the noise with trusted, transparent, and credible reporting. Visit truemark.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.